You scroll, it refreshes.
And they always have something for you.
You scroll, it refreshes. It's endless. It's a slot machine.
Hello, I'm Rory Reynolds, and welcome to this week's edition of A Closer Look, where we take you behind some of the biggest stories of the week. This week we're talking about social media and its impact on our children. In the United States, more states are looking to require parental approval for children to use social media accounts. This week my colleague Cody Combs, our social media editor, is going to join us to give us his insight. Cody, we've been talking about social media. It's been around in our lives for 15 years or more. Why does it continue to have such an impact?
Well, now more than ever, right? And the question is, in fact, why? Well, that's because these really young millennials, we have Generation Alpha, you have Generation Z, they've grown up with this stuff baked into their lives. You and I, our generation, we kind of opted in slowly but surely. We found out some things we liked about it. We found out some things we didn't like about it. We definitely remember a time in our lives before it. We know what it was like. This generation has grown up with it. Social media is more prevalent in many places than playgrounds, than public parks, than sidewalks. So when you think about that and you combine it with the pandemic, when all these children couldn't go to school, they had to have tablets, they had to have their smartphones, they had to have those high-speed internet connections. This is all they've really known. So we're reaching a crescendo moment. It's unprecedented, really, in terms of technology, humanity. So what happens now is you have these societal ills that have been plaguing mankind for as long as one can remember. You've got violence, you've got crime, you've got predatory behavior, you've got stalking, you've got anger, you've got meanness out there. And who's more vulnerable to that? Well, it's children on social media. All this stuff, it's not new. These problems aren't new. Social media didn't necessarily cause it, but what we're seeing now is these things used to take place on the street corner. They used to take place in back alleys. They used to take place in buildings. But now, the new street corner, the new back alley, the new building is in fact social media. And when you think about how many children depend on their tablets to communicate, it's a little bit frightening, the things that they are potentially exposed to. So we're at a really, really unique and pivotal moment for technology, for humanity, and for the most vulnerable children.
This, as we say, this technology has been around for quite some time, but we haven't really regulated it any differently now than we did when it was first invented, or have we? You mentioned before, sometimes it's a case of playing whack-a-mole with the latest technology or the latest social media. Perhaps you could speak to that.
Well, there is a lag time, unfortunately. And the lag time gets combined with the backlash to this big tech thing that's pervasive in all of our lives now. You have the state of Utah in the United States now requiring parental consent before these children sign up for social media platforms. It remains to be seen if those types of laws are going to be effective, though. They're going to be challenged inevitably. They don't come into effect until 2014. Various other states are attempting other laws. The EU also has issues right now, and they're trying to put up some roadblocks for these social media companies. But it's complicated because usually by the time these laws come around with these social media platforms, the platforms that they address are passé in the eyes of children. They're no longer the platform du jour. So that's the game of whack-a-mole I'm talking about. But that's not to say that we shouldn't have regulation at all. We need some sort of regulation. It does help in some ways. And even if these laws in Utah get challenged, even if these laws don't end up being effective because they're not on the right platforms, it sends a message to big tech that, okay, we're not going to let you run roughshod over us. We're not going to let you run roughshod over our children and expose them to things that we don't want them exposed to. Then it does make a difference. You have companies that start to self-police.
To listen to some of the politicians that repeatedly raise social media is a big evil. You would think that this is a scourge in our lives and our young people. But inevitably, we have social media and we live with it. And in fact, it is part of learning and part of communication. What is the best way to address this?
Well, it takes a village, right? You're not going to have one single law that makes everything better. There's no silver bullet. Parents need to be involved. Legislators need to be involved. Big tech needs to be involved. Anybody who says they're big tech, well, it's not their fault what he'll post on the platforms. They're fooling themselves. That's just no way. We all have to do better.
So with that in mind, social media companies haven't been deaf to this. They have acted and they have developed over the years. Could you tell us a bit about that, what they have done to make their own products safer?
Well, there's an age threshold for most of them. Facebook, you have to be at least 13 to go on the platform. Same goes for Instagram. TikTok, in the US at least, has a special version of the app for people under 13. However, the TikTok CEO openly said that he doesn't allow his own child to use the platform yet. So that right there should send up some red flags. There's a juxtaposition there. If the CEO of the company has some concerns about his kid being on it, you should also have some concerns about your kids being on it. Apple offers a screen time feature, which allows you to get really granular with your kid's iPhone. If they have an iPhone, you have tons of options. You can set limits on certain apps. You can make it so certain apps appear, disappear. You can lock down on certain browsing, what they're able to search. Google has a similar feature as well, although it's contingent on you having an Android device. And it's a little bit iffy. You can change the browser on Google and get around that, which goes back to our main point that these are not silver bullets, but they do help. Microsoft, if you're on a desktop, has Microsoft Family Security feature that allows you also to get granular, not just with what your kids are browsing, not just with what platforms they're on, but what folders they're opening, what software they're using. So there are options out there. That being said, if you show me all these options, kids will show you many, many ways around them. So again, it takes legislation.
And parents need to be switched on as well to act on these.
Exactly.
To our final point, just today a study is out suggesting that Facebook has no negative effect on our well-being, if that is to be believed. But social media is addictive to all of us who use it. Is that plain to see for all of us?
Addictive is a very strong word, and I think we could keep medical professionals, scientists, psychiatrists to some extent really busy debating about the word addictiveness. I will say these social media platforms are designed to be responsive, very responsive, frighteningly so. Going back to the earliest days of personal computing, the big debate wasn't whether computers would take over, whether they wouldn't. There was a huge debate about, are people going to want to sit there, punch in a command, have to wait for it to respond, because these were really old machines, and they'll lose interest. They won't want to, it's going to be a problem. They'll be less productive. They won't want to stick around the computer. Then IBM scientists came up with something called the Doherty threshold. They said, if you type in a command, if you punch in something, and it gets back to you within something 400 milliseconds, you will be glued to that screen. Now, we've come by leaps and bounds. Every computer passes the Doherty threshold now. Look at some of these apps, how they're designed. You scroll, it refreshes.
And they always have something for you.
You scroll, it refreshes. It's endless. It's a slot machine. So, who's most vulnerable to those slot machines? I think it's safe to say kids and children are more vulnerable than adults. And so they need to be dealt with differently in how they use it and how they're monitored to some extent. Now, the big question, is it a problem? You mentioned the one study that says it has no impact on our lives. I'm a little bit skeptical of that only because you see all these different studies all the time, and that's not to say it's just a wash, but a few years ago the Wall Street Journal came across some Facebook documents that they obtained showing that Facebook's own internal surveys and their own internal studies showed some concerns about the Instagram platform and the effect that it was having on teens. When those internal studies come to fruition and Facebook starts to pump the brakes a little bit, myself, as a lay person, I'm also a little bit concerned. Again, social media did not cause all these problems in our society, but it is affecting them in some ways. So it's irresponsible for people to say, oh, well, what can you do? It's out there, everybody's on it. We can curtail it, and we can make it better, but it requires a team effort. Public officials, politicians, parents, children as well.
Cody, thank you very much for joining us. A debate that is not going away, and social media is not leaving our lives anytime soon. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can catch all of our previous episodes on our YouTube channel, and if you'd like to suggest any topics for future shows, you can leave them in the comments below. Thanks again.